I'm Bryn Hollister, 34 years old, and while my husband thinks I'm just a trophy wife who spends her days arranging flowers, I am actually the silent majority shareholder of a global real estate conglomerate worth over $900 million. The morning sun hit the imported Italian marble of my kitchen island, casting long, sharp shadows across the room. I was slicing a lemon for my water, the knife slicing cleanly through the rind. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the hallway. It wasn't the usual rhythmic click of the lock. It was a violent thud that shook the crystal chandelier above the foyer. My stomach tightened. I knew that sound. It was the sound of Marcus coming home with a purpose, and usually that purpose wasn't kind. I didn't turn around immediately when I heard his heavy footsteps thunder into the kitchen. I kept my back to him, focusing on the scent of citrus filling the air, trying to steady my breathing. "Turn around, Bryn," he barked, his voice dripping with a cold, unfamiliar venom. I wiped my hands on a tea towel and turned slowly. Marcus stood there, his face flushed, his designer suit slightly rumpled. He looked manic. In his hand, he clutched a thick manila envelope. He didn't just place it on the counter, he threw it. The envelope slid across the marble, stopping inches from my hip. "What is this?" I asked, my voice calm, betraying none of the adrenaline flooding my veins. "Freedom," he sneered, crossing his arms over his chest. "Mine specifically." I looked down at the papers spilling out. Divorce decree, petition for dissolution of marriage. My eyes scanned the legal jargon, picking out the key phrases instantly. Years of reading complex commercial leases and acquisition contracts allowed me to dissect the document in seconds. He wasn't just leaving me. He was trying to annihilate me. "I'm done, Bryn," he said, pacing the length of the kitchen, his shoes clicking aggressively on the floor tiles. "I'm done with the boredom. I'm done with coming home to this." He gestured vaguely at me as if I were a piece of furniture he had grown tired of. "This," I repeated, keeping my face impassive. "You," he spat. "The quiet, the nothingness. You contribute nothing to this life, Bryn. You exist in the space I pay for." I felt a spark of amusement deep in my chest, buried under the shock. If only he knew who actually paid for the space. "Is there someone else?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I had known for months. My private investigators were better than the ones he used for his pathetic business mergers. Marcus stopped pacing and smiled. It was a cruel, triumphant smile. "Her name is Chloe," he announced, puffing out his chest. "She's 22, she's vibrant. She's everything you forgot how to be 10 years ago." He took a step closer, invading my personal space. "And she's pregnant." The air left the room. That detail wasn't in my investigator's report. A baby. He was having a baby with her. My hand instinctively went to the edge of the counter, gripping the cold stone until my knuckles turned white. "I see," I whispered. "No, you don't see," he laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You don't see anything because you live in a bubble I built for you. But that bubble is popping today." He pointed a finger at the papers. "I've already signed the transfer deeds. This house, the estate, it's going to Chloe." My head snapped up. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Marcus said, his eyes gleaming with malice. "I'm kicking you out. Chloe needs a stable environment to raise my son. She loves this property. She loves the view, so I gave it to her. It's a pushing present." He looked at me with pure disgust. "You have 48 hours to pack your bags and get out. Take your clothes, take your little trinkets, but leave the furniture. It suits her taste better than yours anyway." I looked around the kitchen. I looked at the custom cabinetry I had commissioned from a craftsman in Germany. I looked at the smart glass windows I had installed to optimize energy efficiency for the entire grid of the estate. I looked at the floor beneath his feet. He thought he owned this house because his name was on the mortgage payments. He had no idea that the bank he paid his mortgage to was a subsidiary of a holding company owned by a trust, and the sole beneficiary of that trust was me. You can't just give the house away, Marcus, I said quietly, testing the waters. I can do whatever I want, he shouted, slamming his hand on the island. I earned every brick in this mansion. I worked 18-hour days while you sat here drinking tea and playing housewife. I made the money. I bought the land. I built the life. His arrogance was suffocating. He truly believed it. He believed his mid-level tech consultancy firm generated enough capital to afford a $40 million estate in the most exclusive zip code in California. He never questioned why his loan applications were approved so easily. He never questioned why the interest rates were impossibly low. He never questioned why the seller of this land accepted his offer over 3 higher bids. He didn't know that I had orchestrated every single step of his life for the last 7 years to make him feel like a king, just so I could operate in the shadows without scrutiny. You're pathetic, he hissed, leaning in close to my face. Look at you, you're not even fighting back, you're just standing there like a statue. This is exactly why I'm leaving. You have no fire, no ambition. You're a leech, Bryn. A leech. I was the host organism, and he was the parasite, but he was too blind to see the blood on his own lips. Chloe is moving in on Friday, he said, checking his watch as if he had a meeting to catch. She wants to start redecorating the nursery immediately. I suggest you be gone before she gets here. I don't want you upsetting her. He grabbed an apple from the bowl, took a bite, and tossed it back half-eaten. Get a lawyer if you want, he called out over his shoulder as he walked toward the door. But don't waste your time. I have the best legal team in the city. You'll walk away with nothing but the clothes on your back. I watched him leave. I heard the front door slam again. Silence rushed back into the room, heavy and suffocating. I looked down at the divorce papers. I looked at the deed transfer document he had foolishly included in the stack, showing he had attempted to sign the title over to Chloe Madison. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands weren't shaking anymore. A cold, surgical calm had settled over me. I dialed a number that wasn't saved in my contacts, a number only 3 people in the world had access to. This is Bryn, I said, my voice steady. Mrs. Hollister, the voice on the other end answered instantly. What do you need? Initiate protocol Obsidian, I said, staring at the spot where Marcus had stood. And get the legal team for Apex Holdings on the line. My husband just tried to gift company property to a third party without authorization. I walked over to the window and looked out at the sprawling gardens, the infinity pool, and the guest house beyond. Marcus thought I was a pathetic housewife. He thought he was casting me out into the cold. He had no idea that by Friday he wouldn't just be homeless. He would be trespassing on my land. I stood frozen in the doorway of the living room, my fingernails digging crescents into my palms. The scene before me was grotesque in its casual cruelty. Marcus was sweeping his arm across the mantel, knocking my framed family photos into a black heavy-duty trash bag. The glass shattered with a sickening crunch. He didn't even flinch. He just kept moving, treating my memories like hazardous waste that needed to be incinerated. Faster, babe, a voice drawled from the center of the room. I shifted my gaze to the sofa. My sofa. The vintage cognac leather sectional I had imported from Milan 3 years ago. Chloe was draped across it, her shoes, muddy sneakers, resting directly on the cushions. She looked younger than 22. She looked like a child playing house in a mansion she couldn't comprehend. Her hand moved in slow, circular motions over her belly, rubbing the fabric of her tight dress. She caught me staring and smirked. It wasn't a nervous smile. It was a territorial display. "Oh, hi," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "Marcus said you were still packing. We're trying to visualize the new layout. This gray is just so depressing, isn't it?" She gestured to the room, to the walls I had hand-painted with Venetian plaster. "It's very drab," she sighed, picking at a loose thread on a throw pillow. "We're thinking golds, brights, something with life." Marcus walked over to her, stepping over the trash bag filled with my photographs. He leaned down and kissed her forehead right in front of me. My stomach turned not with jealousy but with revulsion. He straightened up and looked at me, his expression hardening into that new, unfamiliar mask of disdain. "Are you done?" he asked, checking his watch. "I want you out before dinner. We have a private chef coming to celebrate." "Celebrate," I repeated flatly. "The new chapter," he said, puffing out his chest. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. He fished around for a moment, pulling out a crisp stack of bills. He didn't hand them to me. He placed them on the coffee table right next to Chloe's feet. "There's $1,000 there," he said, his tone generous, as if he were donating to a charity case. "That should cover a motel for a week or two. Maybe buy you some interview clothes. God knows you'll need a job." I looked at the money, $100 bills. He thought this was mercy. He thought this was a lifeline. To him, $1,000 was a significant amount of cash to have on hand. To me, it was a rounding error on my daily dividend statements. "You're giving me cash?" I asked, keeping my face devoid of emotion. "For 10 years of marriage. It's more than you deserve," Chloe chimed in, giggling. "Marcus told me you haven't worked a day in your life. You should be grateful he's giving you anything. Most men would just change the locks." Marcus nodded in agreement. "She's right, Bryn, don't push your luck. Take the money, take your bags, and go." My heart began to hammer against my ribs. It was a physical thudding, loud and rhythmic, but it wasn't grief. It wasn't the heartbreak of a scorned woman, it was adrenaline. It was the cold, soaring rush of absolute power. I looked from Marcus to Chloe, dissecting them. They looked so comfortable, so secure. Marcus thought he held all the cards because his name was on the mailbox. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet, the roof over his head, and the very air he was breathing were owned by a holding company called Obsidian LLC. And he had no idea that I was the sole signatory for Obsidian LLC. I looked past them, down the hallway toward the east wing, toward my hobby room. Marcus called it my knitting sanctuary. He never went in there. He thought it was filled with yarn and hot glue guns. He didn't know that behind the false wall of the closet sat a military-grade server and a laptop with biometric encryption. He didn't know that inside that room, I tracked the global flow of capital for my conglomerate. He didn't know that I had a direct line to the board of directors of the bank that held his business loans. All I had to do was walk down that hall. All I had to do was scan my retina. All I had to do was press a single key. One keystroke. That was all it would take to trigger the foreclosure clause in the mortgage contract he had never bothered to read properly. One keystroke to freeze his corporate accounts for a security audit. One keystroke to turn off the electricity, the water, and the security gate codes. I could crush his entire world before he even finished his celebratory dinner. I took a deep breath, savoring the copper taste of impending violence in my mouth. "I don't want your money, Marcus," I said softly. I stepped forward and picked up the trash bag he had filled with my photos. "Suit yourself," he sneered, turning his back on me to stroke Chloe's hair. "More for the nursery." I walked toward the hallway. "Where are you going?" he barked, not looking up. "The exit is that way." Just getting my knitting kit, I lied, my voice steady. I wouldn't want to leave my hobbies behind. Hurry up, he muttered. I walked down the hall, my heels clicking on the hardwood. I reached the door to the hobby room. I opened it and stepped into the cool, dark silence. I didn't turn on the overhead light. I walked straight to the closet and placed my hand on the hidden panel. It clicked open. The blue light of the server hummed to life, illuminating my face. I opened the laptop. Protocol Obsidian, I whispered to the empty room. It was time to show my husband who really paid the bills. I'm Verity Sterling, 34 years old, and I am the silent majority shareholder of the multinational conglomerate that just denied my husband's request for a company credit card. I stepped out of the hobby room, clutching my oversized floral tote bag against my chest. To Marcus, this bag contained half-finished scarves and cheap yarn. He didn't know the floral fabric was lined with Kevlar. He didn't know that buried beneath a decoy layer of wool was a drive containing 4 terabytes of encrypted leverage on every member of the city council. I walked back into the living room, keeping my head down. I made my shoulders slump forward. I adopted the posture of a defeated woman, a woman whose world had just been shattered by a man who thought he was a god. Marcus was still standing by the fireplace, one arm draped possessively around Chloe's waist. She was sipping from my favorite crystal flute. She hadn't even waited for the door to close behind me before raiding the liquor cabinet. Finally, Marcus groaned, rolling his eyes. I thought you got lost. Just grabbing my things, I whispered, staring at my scuffed ballet flats. Well, don't let the door hit you, Chloe giggled, the sound sharp and grating like glass in a disposal. Actually, do let it hit you. Maybe it'll knock some sense into you. Marcus laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound that I had tolerated for 7 years. Goodbye, Bryn, he said, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. Send the lawyer the address of whatever dump you end up in. I'll have the papers couriered over. I didn't look up. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the vase on the entry table at his head, even though my fingers twitched with the urge. I simply turned around and walked to the heavy oak door. I opened it and stepped out onto the porch. The evening air was biting, a cold drizzle beginning to slick the driveway. I heard the lock click shut behind me instantly. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home felt final. It echoed in the hollow space of my chest. I walked down the stone steps, the rain plastering my frizzy hair to my forehead. I walked past Marcus's leased Porsche. I walked past Chloe's bright red convertible. I stopped in front of my car. It was a 2015 Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper and a fading paint job. I had bought it off Craigslist for cash 3 years ago, specifically for this persona. It was part of the costume. I fumbled with the keys, dropping them once on the wet pavement. I knew Marcus was watching from the bay window. I could feel his gaze on my back. I bent down to retrieve the keys, making sure to look clumsy, pathetic. I opened the driver's side door and slid onto the cracked fabric seat. The car smelled like stale vanilla air freshener and old receipts. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered. It coughed, wheezed, and died. I tried again. This time it caught with a reluctant whine. I glanced at the house one last time through the rain-streaked window. I saw Marcus's silhouette in the window. He was raising his glass in a mock toast. He was celebrating his victory. He was celebrating his freedom. I put the car in gear and slowly pulled out of the driveway, the tires crunching on the gravel. I drove down the winding suburban street, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I kept my speed exactly at the limit. I stopped completely at the stop sign. I was the picture of a law-abiding, heartbroken housewife retreating into obscurity. I drove for exactly 3 minutes. I turned left onto Elm Street, then right onto a secluded access road behind the old industrial park. The streetlights here were broken, casting long, jagged shadows across the pavement. But I didn't need streetlights. I saw the headlights cut through the gloom ahead. 3 black SUVs were idling in a perfect row. In the center sat a long wheelbase Maybach, its engine purring so quietly it was almost silent. I pulled the Honda up behind the convoy and killed the engine. The silence was instant. I took a deep breath, exhaling the tension that had been coiling in my spine for hours. The rear door of the Maybach opened before I even unbuckled my seatbelt. A man stepped out into the rain, holding a large black umbrella. Julian, my chief of staff. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than the Honda I was sitting in. I opened my door and stepped out. I didn't run. I didn't hunch against the rain. I stood up straight, my spine snapping into a vertical line of steel. Julian moved instantly to shield me, tilting the umbrella so not a single drop touched me. "Good evening, Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice low and professional. "Julian," I replied, my voice dropping an octave, losing the breathy, timid quality of Bryn. "Is the team assembled? Boardroom Alpha is live via satellite link inside the vehicle," he confirmed. "We have the acquisition team in Tokyo and the legal counsel in New York on standby." I tossed him the keys to the Honda. "Have that crushed," I said, "tonight. Consider it done." I slid into the back seat of the Maybach. The interior was a sanctuary of cream leather and warm, ambient lighting. The air smelled of sandalwood and ozone. I sat down and the door closed with a solid, reassuring thud, sealing out the world of leaky faucets and emotional abuse. I looked at the seat across from me. A garment bag was waiting. I unzipped it and pulled out a tailored black blazer with sharp, architectural shoulders. I peeled off the pilling gray fleece sweater I had worn for the last 6 hours. I balled it up and shoved it onto the floor. I slipped into the blazer. It fit like a second skin. Armor. I reached for the small velvet box on the center console. I opened it and took out my watch. A Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime. I fastened it around my wrist, the weight of the gold grounding me. I felt the transformation complete. Bryn, the doormat wife, was dead. She had died the moment that door locked. V.H. Sterling was back in the driver's seat. I picked up the secure tablet waiting on the tray table. It recognized my face instantly and unlocked. A stream of data flooded the screen. Bank accounts, property deeds, stock portfolios. I navigated to the folder labeled Project Icarus. It was the file I had built for Marcus. I tapped the screen, opening the live surveillance feed of my own home. The hidden cameras I had installed in the smoke detectors years ago were broadcasting in 4K resolution. I watched Marcus spin Chloe around in the living room. They were laughing. They were opening another bottle of wine. "Julian," I said, pressing the intercom button. "Yes, ma'am. Connect me to the utility grid." "Access granted." I looked at the tablet. I saw the power consumption metrics for the house at 424 Oak Lane. I saw the water main status. I saw the gas line feed. I hovered my finger over the emergency shutoff command. "He called me a leech," I said quietly to the empty cabin. I tapped the screen. On the video feed, the lights in the mansion instantly died. The music cut out. Marcus froze in the darkness. I saw the confusion on his face illuminated by the flash of his cell phone. I smiled. "Let's go," I said. "I have a husband to bankrupt." I'm Verity Sterling, 34 years old, and I am the majority shareholder of the conglomerate about to swallow my husband's employer whole. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. I stepped out onto the marble floor of my penthouse. The space was vast, cold, and silent. It was a stark contrast to the suburban prison I had just escaped. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, a glittering ocean of lights that I practically owned. "Welcome home, Miss Sterling." The automated system greeted me, the voice smooth and genderless. "Lights to 50%, I commanded, kicking off my heels. I walked barefoot across the heated stone floor toward the command center I had set up in the living area. Julian was already there. He was arranging files on the glass desk, his movements precise and efficient. "The acquisition team is holding on line 1, Julian said, not looking up. "They need your final authorization on the Apex Capital merger." I sat down in the leather ergonomic chair. It groaned softly under my weight. I swiveled toward the massive monitor wall. "Put Marcus's personnel file on the main screen," I said. My voice was steady, but my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A grid of data populated the center screen. Marcus Sterling, Senior Vice President of Sales. His photo stared back at me. It was his corporate headshot, smiling that charming, predatory smile that had fooled me for a decade. I scanned the financials of his firm, Apex Capital. Red numbers bled across the spreadsheet. They were hemorrhaging money. They were desperate. They were begging for a bailout. I looked at the potential buyers list. At the very top in bold green text was Vantage Group, my holding company. A cold, sharp laugh escaped my throat. "He has no idea," I whispered. "Ma'am." Julian asked, pausing his typing. "He thinks he's a big shot," I said, pointing at the screen. "He thinks he's untouchable because he brings in revenue, but his ship is sinking, Julian, and I'm the ocean." I typed in my override code. I authorized the acquisition of Apex Capital. The status bar loaded, processing, complete. "Congratulations," Julian said dryly. "You now own 60% of his voting stock." "I am technically his boss," I said, savoring the words. "I am the boss of his boss." I leaned closer to the screen. I navigated to the Executive Compensation and Perks tab within Marcus's file. I wanted to see exactly what my money was paying for: expense accounts, first-class travel, club memberships, and there it was. Vehicle allowance, 2024 Mercedes-Benz SL Cherry Red. My eyes narrowed. The red convertible sitting in my driveway. The one Chloe was driving. He had told her it was a gift. He had told her he bought it with his bonus. "Liar," I hissed. "It was a company lease." He was expensing his Mistress' push present to the firm I now owned. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I felt a surge of adrenaline, hot and electric, flood my veins. "Julian," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "what is the company policy on unauthorized use of corporate vehicles by non-employees?" Julian didn't miss a beat. "Immediate termination of the lease and asset recovery. It's a liability issue." "Strict enforcement," I said. I opened the fleet management portal. I located the GPS transponder for the Mercedes. It was pinging from 424 Oak Lane, my house. "Freeze it," I ordered. I typed the command into the system: disable ignition, lock doors, activate recovery mode. I hit enter with a satisfying crack of the plastic key. On the screen, the vehicle status icon turned from green to flashing red. Somewhere in the suburbs, that car was now a 2-ton paperweight. "And Julian," I added. "Yes, Miss Sterling. Flag his corporate credit cards as compromised," I said, swiveling the chair to face the city view. "Security breach, suspected fraud, lock them all." Done. I stood up and walked to the window. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. I could imagine the scene. Chloe trying to leave to get more wine. The car refusing to start. The doors refusing to open. Marcus trying to pay for an Uber only to have his card declined. I watched the rain lash against the window of my penthouse. I felt a physiological shift. My shoulders relaxed. The knot in my stomach uncoiled. For the first time in 7 years, I wasn't the one afraid of the dark. I was the one controlling it. Draft a memo to all Apex senior management, I said, watching my reflection in the glass. Mandatory performance reviews starting Monday morning. Attendance required, no exceptions. I turned back to Julian, a shark-like grin spreading across my face. I think it's time I introduced myself to my new employees. I'm Verity Sterling, 34 years old, and I possess a net worth that allows me to buy justice as easily as I buy groceries. I stared at the document Julian slid across the glass desk. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. It was pure, unadulterated rage. When was this filed? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. 3 days ago, Julian replied, tapping the timestamp on the digital scan. County Clerk's Office, expedited processing. I looked down at the paper. It was a quitclaim deed, a legal instrument used to transfer property rights. At the top, the property address, 424 Oak Lane, my home. The home I had paid the down payment for with money I inherited from my grandmother, long before I built my empire. The home I had scrubbed and painted and decorated while Marcus sat on the couch playing video games. I scanned down to the grantor section, Marcus Sterling, and right next to it, Verity Sterling. My eyes burned as I focused on the signature above my printed name. It was a looped, cursive scrawl. It looked somewhat like mine, but the V was too sharp. The Y didn't tail off correctly. I didn't sign this, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. We know, Julian said. The forensic handwriting analysis is already complete. It's a 99% match for Marcus's handwriting style when he attempts to disguise it. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold and dizzy. He hadn't just kicked me out. He hadn't just humiliated me. He had committed a felony. He had forged my signature on a legal document to steal my marital asset and gift it to his mistress. I looked at the grantee line, Chloe Ann Miller. He gave our house to her. Legally on paper, she owned the roof over my head. This is fraud, I said, my voice rising. This is grand larceny. This is forgery in the first degree. I reached for my phone. My fingers flew to the contacts list. I scrolled to V. Vance, District Attorney. We had attended a charity gala together last month. He had joked that if I ever needed a body buried, I should call him. I didn't need a body buried. I needed a husband buried. My thumb hovered over the call button. I could end this right now. I could have squad cars screaming down Oak Lane within 10 minutes. I could have Marcus dragged out of that house in handcuffs, weeping in the rain while Chloe watched in horror. I imagined the scene. It was satisfying. It was visceral, but it was too fast. I pulled my thumb back. I set the phone down on the desk, face down. No, I said. Julian raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, this is a slam dunk. We can have him booked tonight. I stood up and paced the length of the room, the silk of my blouse rustling in the silence. If I arrest him tonight, he's a victim of a misunderstanding, I said, turning to face the city lights. He posts bail. He gets a lawyer. He spins a story about how I verbally agreed to it and he was just helping with the paperwork. I clenched my fists. I don't want him to have an excuse, I hissed. I want him to feel safe. I want him to think he got away with it. I looked back at the screen where the surveillance feed was paused. Marcus was standing in the dark living room looking at his phone. He thought the power outage was a fluke. He thought the car trouble was a glitch. He had no idea the ground was crumbling beneath his feet. Let the deed process, I commanded. Let the title transfer officially. Let him pay the transfer taxes. I walked back to the desk and picked up the forged document. I traced the fake signature with my fingernail. I want him to move her in completely, I said, a cruel smile touching my lips. I want her to hang her tacky art on my walls. I want them to plan renovations. I want them to host a housewarming party. I looked at Julian. And when they are at the absolute height of their joy, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm, when they think they have erased me completely, that is when I will introduce them to the penal code. I felt my heart rate slow down. The panic was gone. It was replaced by the cold, hard weight of strategy. He wanted to play games with legal documents. Fine, I was about to teach him that he was playing checkers and I own the board. Keep the evidence secure, I told Julian. And prepare the dossier for the DA. I want it gift wrapped. Understood. I sat back down in my chair. I felt powerful. I felt dangerous. Marcus had stolen my house, but in doing so he had handed me the keys to his prison cell. Julian, I said, swiveling toward the monitor, let's turn the power back on at the house. Julian paused. Ma'am, turn it back on, I repeated. Let them have their music, let them have their wine, let them celebrate. I watched as the lights on the video feed flickered back to life. I saw Marcus cheer. I saw him pull Chloe into a hug. He looked so relieved. He looked so happy. Enjoy it, darling, I whispered to the screen. It's the last good night of your life. I'm Verity Sterling, 34 years old, and I possess the kind of wealth that turns a cheating husband's life into a chessboard where he is nothing more than a pawn. I sat in the darkness of my temporary penthouse command center, the blue light of the monitors washing over my face. My eyes were locked on the live feed from 424 Oak Lane. It was barely 24 hours since Marcus had thrown me out, and already the vultures were circling. Chloe had invited her friends over. I watched them strut through my front door, shaking wet umbrellas onto the hardwood floors I had hand-polished myself. There were 4 of them. They were loud. They were drunk. They were touching everything. Oh my God, Chloe, this place is massive, one of them squealed, running her hand along the back of my velvet sofa. I know, right? Chloe laughed, twirling in the center of the living room like she was the queen of the castle. Marcus said it was just sitting here collecting dust with his ex. He said it needed a woman's touch. My jaw tightened so hard I felt a sharp pain radiate up to my temple. Collecting dust, I had built that home. I had curated every piece of art, every book, every cushion. It's a bit old-fashioned, though, Chloe added, wrinkling her nose at my antique bookshelf. We're going to gut it. Marcus gave me carte blanche to modernize. I felt a surge of nausea, hot and acidic, rise in my throat. She walked over to the coffee table and picked up an iPad. Check this out, she said, swiping through a browser. I'm thinking sleek, minimalist, white leather everywhere. She tapped on a listing for a custom Italian sectional. Price tag $18,000. Do it, her friend egged her on. Order it right now. I am, Chloe giggled. He gave me the card this morning. He said, buy whatever makes you happy, baby. She reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek black credit card. I leaned forward, squinting at the high-definition feed. I recognized the card instantly. It wasn't his personal platinum card. It wasn't our joint account. It was the Apex Capital Black card, the corporate expense account. The card strictly reserved for client dinners and travel logistics. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, heavy rhythm. Marcus was letting his mistress furnish a stolen house with company funds. He wasn't just unethical, he was spectacularly stupid. On my second monitor, I pulled up the real-time transaction log for Apex Capital. I had administrator access now. I saw the pre-authorization ping hit the server. Merchant, Lux Italian Interiors. Amount 18,450. Status, pending approval. My finger hovered over the flag as fraud button. I could stop this instantly. I could freeze the transaction. I could make the card decline in front of her friends, humiliating her in the one moment she felt most powerful. I wanted to do it. I wanted to see her face crumble. But then the cold logic of revenge washed over me, cooling my blood. If I stopped the charge now, it was just an attempted misuse of funds, a slap on the wrist, a misunderstanding. But if I let it go through, if I let the money leave the company account, that was theft. That was embezzlement. That was a federal crime. I slowly pulled my hand away from the keyboard. Go ahead, Chloe, I whispered to the screen, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. Buy the matching chairs too. I watched as she tapped the screen. Done, she shrieked. It'll be here in 6 weeks. Let's do the kitchen next, her friend shouted. They began adding items to the cart. A $6,000 espresso machine, imported tiles, smart appliances. I watched the transaction log scroll like a ticker tape of Marcus's destruction. $6,000, approved. $12,500, approved. $4,200, approved. Every ding of the notification bell was another year added to his potential sentence. He was sleeping upstairs in that house, completely unaware that his girlfriend was currently spending his freedom. I turned my attention to the document on my desk. It was the final purchase agreement for Apex Capital. I had already secured the voting stock, but this was the kill shot. This document reclassified the company's assets under my holding firm, Sterling Global. It meant that as of this moment, Marcus wasn't stealing from a faceless board of directors. He was stealing from me. I uncapped my fountain pen. The ink was black and permanent. I looked at Chloe one last time on the screen. She was pouring champagne, laughing, celebrating a life she hadn't earned. She thought she had won the lottery. She had no idea she was cashing a check that would bounce her straight onto the street. I pressed the pen to the paper. I signed my name with a flourish, Verity Sterling. I set the pen down. The acquisition was complete. I own the company. I own the card she was swiping. I own the house she was standing in. And come Monday morning, I would own Marcus. I sat back in my leather chair, watching the numbers climb past $50,000. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt a dark, icy satisfaction settling in my chest. Keep spending, darling, I said to the empty room. I want the receipts to be long enough to strangle him with. I'm Verity Sterling, 34 years old, and tonight I am about to walk into a room and shatter my husband's reality with a single glass of champagne. I stood in the center of my temporary command center, the hum of the servers acting as a low-level soundtrack to my adrenaline. The invitations had gone out at 9:00 a.m. sharp. Mandatory attendance, the heavy cream cardstock read, to celebrate the acquisition of Apex Capital by Sterling Global Holdings. I watched the live feed from the house on Oak Lane. Marcus was holding the invitation like it was a winning lottery ticket. He was practically vibrating with excitement. "This is it, Chloe," he said, pacing back and forth on the Persian rug I had bought in Istanbul. "New ownership means a shake-up. If I get FaceTime with the new boss tonight, I can secure the VP spot. I just need to make an impression." I took a sip of water, my eyes narrowing. He had no idea that the new boss he was so desperate to impress was the same woman he had discarded like yesterday's trash. He turned to Chloe, who was sitting on the sofa scrolling through her phone. "Get up," he barked. We need to get you ready. Chloe looked up, confused. Ready? It's 3 in the afternoon. I bought you something, Marcus said, grabbing a garment bag from the hallway. I need you to look the part, no more mall clothes, I need you to look like a prize. He unzipped the bag. It was a dress. It was red. It was loud. It was aggressively sexy. It was a dress designed to scream, "Look at what I can afford." Chloe stood up and touched the fabric. Marcus, this. The slit is really high, and the back is completely open. I don't know if, put it on, he interrupted, his voice losing its warmth. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you, tonight isn't about you being comfortable. It's about me showing the new ownership that I am a man of status. You are part of the package. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. He was parading her. He was treating her like a leased luxury car. I watched as she took the dress and walked meekly toward the bathroom. Then my phone buzzed on the desk. I picked it up, a text message from Marcus. My heart hammered a violent rhythm against my ribs before I even unlocked the screen. Marcus, the firm has a gala tonight at the Ritz. High security, big players only. I waited for the second bubble to appear. Marcus, don't get any ideas about showing up to talk. Stay away from the venue. I don't want you embarrassing me with your cheap clothes and your sad, desperate vibe. We are celebrating the future. You are the past, stay home. I read the message twice. Cheap clothes, embarrassing. I let out a short, sharp laugh that echoed in the empty penthouse. He thought I was sitting in a motel room crying over wedding photos. He thought I was broken. I set the phone down. Julian, I called out, my voice steady and clear. The car, waiting downstairs, ma'am, Julian replied from the doorway. And the stylist has finished steaming the garment. I walked into the master bedroom. Hanging in the center of the room was my armor. It wasn't red. It wasn't loud. It was a custom-made midnight blue silk gown from a designer in Paris who didn't sell to the public. It cost $20,000. It shimmered like oil on water. I stripped off my casual clothes. I stepped into the silk. It was cold against my skin for a split second before it warmed to my body temperature. I pulled the zipper up. It fit like a second skin. There were no sequins. There was no cleavage. The power of the dress wasn't in what it revealed. It was in the terrifying precision of the cut. It whispered wealth. It screamed authority. I sat at the vanity. I pulled my hair back into a severe, elegant chignon. I applied a dark, blood-red lipstick. I fastened a diamond choker around my neck, a piece I had bought at auction last year for the price of a small house. I looked at myself in the mirror. Verity, the wife, was gone. Verity, the victim, was dead. Staring back at me was Verity Sterling, the majority shareholder. I picked up my clutch. I checked the feed one last time. Marcus was in his tuxedo, checking his watch. He looked impatient. Chloe walked out of the bathroom. She looked uncomfortable. The dress was pulling at the seams. She was tugging at the hem. Stop fidgeting, Marcus snapped at her. You look fine. Just smile and don't speak unless someone asks you a direct question. I felt a surge of pity for her, quickly replaced by the icy resolve of my mission. She was his prop, but tonight I was the director. I walked out to the elevator. The doors slid open. I stepped inside. I pulled out my phone and typed a reply to Marcus. Me, don't worry, I wouldn't dream of ruining your big night. I hit send. The elevator began its descent. I felt a chill of pure, unadulterated satisfaction run down my spine. He wanted me to stay away so I wouldn't embarrass him. Oh, Marcus, I wasn't going to embarrass him. I was going to eviscerate him. The doors opened to the lobby. I walked toward the waiting black limousine. The driver opened the door. To the Ritz-Carlton, ma'am? I smiled, and it was the sharpest thing I had ever worn. Yes, I said, take me to my party. I'm Verity Sterling, 34 years old, and I am currently standing in the shadowed wing of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. listening to the muffled laughter of the man who ruined my life as he tries to impress people who now work for me. 30 seconds, Miss Sterling, the head of my security detail murmured. His name was Cale, a former Special Forces operative who cost more per hour than Marcus made in a week. He stood to my right, flanked by 5 other men in identical charcoal suits. They were a wall of muscle and intimidation designed to send a very specific message: do not touch. I smoothed the silk of my midnight blue gown. My hands were steady. My breathing was slow, deliberate. I checked the monitor mounted on the wall. The camera swept over the crowd. There he was. Marcus was standing near the ice sculpture, holding a crystal flute of champagne. He looked radiant, high on the fumes of his own ego. He was leaning in close to the CFO of Apex Capital, laughing too loudly at a joke that probably wasn't funny. Beside him, Chloe looked like a terrified child playing dress-up. The red dress was bunched at her waist, the slit revealing far too much thigh for a corporate gala. She was clutching her clutch bag like a life preserver, her eyes darting around the room, clearly overwhelmed by the sharks circling the water. Marcus didn't even look at her. He was too busy scanning the room, waiting for the new owner to arrive so he could kiss the ring. "It's time," Cale said. He signaled to the venue staff. The heavy double doors of the VIP entrance swung open. The noise of the party hit me first, a wall of chatter, clinking glass, and jazz music. I stepped into the light. The effect was instantaneous. I didn't enter like a guest. I entered like an invasion. My 6 guards formed a V formation around me, moving with military precision. We cut through the periphery of the ballroom, heading straight for the stage. Heads turned, conversations died mid-sentence. The air in the room shifted from festive to tense in a heartbeat. People sensed power and they sensed danger. I kept my chin high, my eyes locked on the podium ahead. But out of the corner of my vision, I saw him. Marcus turned. His eyes landed on the phalanx of security guards first, confusion wrinkling his forehead. Then his gaze moved to the center of the formation. He saw me. I watched the recognition hit him. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was pure, unadulterated rage. He recognized the wife he had told to stay home. He recognized the woman he thought was crying in a motel room. He took a step forward, his face twisting into a scowl. I could practically hear his thoughts. How dare she? How dare she show up here and embarrass me? He started to move toward me, his hand coming up to wave me off, to shoo me away like a stray dog. He opened his mouth to shout something, probably a command to leave. But Cale simply shifted his weight, stepping between us without breaking his stride. He didn't even look at Marcus. He just existed as an immovable object, forcing Marcus to stumble back to avoid a collision. I didn't stop. I didn't look at him. I glided past him, the silk of my dress brushing against the expensive tuxedo he had bought with our joint savings. I reached the stairs to the stage. The jazz band trailed off into an awkward silence. The master of ceremonies, a man named Henderson who had been sweating profusely, tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Henderson's voice boomed, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "If I could have your attention, please." The room went deathly silent. I climbed the stairs, the click of my heels on the wood amplified by the sudden quiet. Marcus was staring up at me, his mouth slightly open. He looked like a glitch in the Matrix. He couldn't process the data his eyes were feeding him. Verity on stage. Verity in a $20,000 gown. Verity surrounded by security. "Tonight marks a new era for Apex Capital," Henderson continued, his voice trembling slightly as he looked at me. "It is my distinct honor to introduce the chairwoman and CEO of our new parent company, Sterling Global Holdings." Marcus blinked. I reached the podium. I placed my hands on the lectern. Henderson gestured to me. Please welcome, Miss Verity Sterling. The name hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Smash. The sound of shattering glass cut through the silence. I looked down. Marcus had dropped his champagne flute. It lay in shards on the marble floor, amber liquid splashing onto his polished shoes and the hem of Chloe's cheap red dress. But he didn't look down. He was staring at me. The blood had drained from his face so completely that he looked like a wax figure. His eyes were wide, terrified, unblinking circles of shock. He wasn't looking at his wife anymore. He was looking at his landlord, his boss, his owner. I leaned into the microphone. "Good evening," I said, my voice smooth, dark, and terrifyingly calm. The sound of my voice seemed to physically strike him. He flinched. I let my gaze sweep over the room, acknowledging the board members, the investors, the sharks. They were all looking at me with newfound respect and fear. Then I narrowed my focus. I locked eyes with Marcus. I saw his throat work as he tried to swallow. I saw his hands shaking at his sides. I saw the exact moment the realization fully settled in. He remembered the credit card alerts. He remembered the house title. He remembered the text message he had sent me an hour ago calling me cheap and embarrassing. He realized that the sad, desperate woman he had discarded was currently holding the leash to his entire existence. I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who has cornered its prey and has nowhere else to be. "I am so glad you could all make it," I said, never breaking eye contact with him. "Especially those of you who thought the past could simply be discarded." Chloe let out a small, confused whimper looking between Marcus and me. She tugged on his sleeve. Marcus, isn't that Verity?" He didn't answer her. He couldn't. He was paralyzed. I stood tall, the lights of the ballroom reflecting off the diamonds at my throat. "I own the company. I own the building." In looking at the terror in his eyes, I knew the most important asset I had acquired tonight. I owned his fear. "I'm Verity Sterling, 34 years old, and I have just turned my cheating husband's victory lap into a public execution." The applause had died down, replaced by a murmuring buzz that sounded like 1,000 angry hornets. I stepped away from the podium. My legs felt like steel springs, coiled and ready. I didn't return to the shadows. I walked down the center stairs of the stage, my heels clicking a rhythm that echoed through the stunned ballroom. Every eye was on me. The crowd parted. These were billionaires, titans of industry, and vicious social climbers, yet they scrambled out of my path like frightened children. They knew a predator when they saw one. I walked straight toward the buffet tables near the ice sculpture, where Marcus was still frozen, a statue of ruin in a damp tuxedo. He was trembling. I could see the vibrations traveling up his arms. Chloe, however, had recovered from her initial shock. Her survival instinct had kicked in, but it was calibrated for a reality that no longer existed. She stepped in front of Marcus, her hands on her hips, the red dress straining against her skin. "This is insane," she hissed, her voice shrill enough to carry over the nearby whispers. She looked around, playing to the audience, trying to cast herself as the damsel and me as the deranged ex-wife. "You can't just crash a private gala and make up lies, Verity. Security should have you thrown out for harassment." I didn't stop walking until I was 6 inches from her face. I looked down at her. I didn't blink. "This isn't a private gala, Chloe," I said, my voice low and lethal. "It's a company event, my company." "Marcus, tell her," she shrieked, grabbing his arm and shaking him. "Tell her to leave." Marcus looked at me. His eyes were glassy. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping on a dock. I reached out my hand. Kale materialized beside me, instantly placing a thick black leather folder into my palm. I slapped the folder against Marcus's chest. The sound of the leather hitting his starched shirt was loud, a sharp crack that made him flinch violently. He instinctively grabbed it to keep it from falling. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice a broken rasp. "That is the forensic accounting report," I said, pitching my voice so the board members standing 5 feet away could hear every syllable. "It details the $4 million you embezzled from the acquisition fund over the last 18 months. It includes the dates, the wire transfers to offshore accounts, and the forged signatures you used to cover your tracks." A gasp rippled through the onlookers. Marcus's knees buckled. He had to lean against the table to stay upright. "And the second document," I continued, relentless, "is your termination notice, effective immediately, for cause, which means no severance, no stock options, and no golden parachute." "You can't," he choked out. "Verity, please." The board works for me now," I cut him off. "And they hate liability." Chloe's eyes darted between us. She was processing the loss of the money, but she clung to the one thing she thought she still had. "Well, we don't need your money," she spat, trying to salvage some shred of dignity. "We have the house. The estate is in Marcus's name and he gave it to me this morning. We're going to live there and you can't touch us." She smirked, thinking she had played a trump card. I felt a smile stretch across my face, but it wasn't happy. It was terrifying. "Oh, Chloe," I said softly, "did you really think I didn't know?" I took a step closer to Marcus. "Tell her, Marcus, tell her about the mortgage." He looked at the floor. He was sweating profusely now, droplets running down his nose. "He can't," I said, "so I will. Marcus hasn't owned that house in 3 years." Chloe froze. "What?" "He leveraged the property to cover his gambling debts 3 years ago," I explained, enjoying the way the color drained from her face. "He was going to lose it to the bank. So a private trust stepped in and bought the note, the Orion Trust." I paused for effect. "I am the sole beneficiary of the Orion Trust, Chloe. I bought the deed to save the house from foreclosure. Marcus has been living there as my tenant. He has no legal right to transfer the title to anyone." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a knife in the gut. "He gave you a piece of paper that is worth less than the napkin under your drink. You're trespassing on my property. You have 1 hour to vacate the premises before I have the locks changed and your belongings incinerated." Chloe let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. She looked at Marcus with pure hatred. "You lied to me. You told me you owned it outright." Marcus didn't answer. He was staring at the folder in his hands, realizing his life was over. I signaled to Kale. "Get them out of my sight," I commanded. "And if they resist, call the police. I'm sure the detectives would love to see the forgery evidence in that folder." Kale nodded. He and 2 other guards stepped forward. They didn't ask nicely. Kale grabbed Marcus by the upper arm, his grip visibly tight. Another guard took Chloe's elbow. "Don't touch me," Chloe screamed, flailing. "Move," Kale barked. They began to drag them toward the main exit. It was a long walk. As they were marched across the ballroom floor, the heavy double doors swung open. The press had been waiting outside, alerted by a tip I had sent 10 minutes ago. The moment Marcus and Chloe were shoved out onto the front steps of the Ritz-Carlton, the world exploded in white light. Flashbulbs erupted like a strobe light storm. I watched from the center of the room. Through the open doors, I saw the reporters swarming them. I saw Marcus shield his face with the termination notice. I saw Chloe trip on her dress, weeping openly, her makeup streaked, her humiliation broadcast live to the world. Security finally closed the doors, cutting off the noise of the shouting paparazzi. Silence returned to the ballroom. I turned back to the room full of stunned elites. I smoothed the silk of my gown. I picked up a fresh glass of champagne from a passing waiter who looked at me with awe. I raised the glass. Now, I said, my voice steady and commanding, let's discuss the future of this company. I'm Verity Sterling, 34 years old, and watching the man who vowed to love me be evicted from my property is the most expensive, yet satisfying therapy session I have ever paid for. 3 days have passed since I dropped the guillotine on Marcus's neck in front of the city's entire social elite. 3 days of silence from my end, and 3 days of frantic, hysterical voicemails from his. I haven't listened to a single one. I simply forwarded them to my legal team as evidence of harassment. But today I needed to be here. I needed to see the paperwork turn into reality. I stood on the sidewalk, wrapped in a trench coat that cost more than Marcus's car, watching the final act of his ruin play out in high definition. The morning air was damp and bit at my exposed skin, but I didn't feel the cold. My blood was running hot, fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and vindication. Across the manicured lawn, a lawn I paid to have landscaped, a team of sheriff's deputies was efficiently dismantling the life Marcus had built on lies. This wasn't a white-glove moving service. These were court-ordered eviction officers. They didn't care about the thread count of the Egyptian cotton sheets or the fragility of the imported vases. They carried boxes and furniture out with a brutal mechanical indifference, piling them onto the wet curb like garbage awaiting pickup. I saw a massive leather sofa, the one Marcus had insisted on buying with his bonus last year, get unceremoniously dumped onto the asphalt. It landed with a heavy, wet thud. I felt a grim smile tug at the corner of my mouth. I knew exactly where the money for that sofa had come from now. It was my money. It had always been my money. From the open front door, a shout erupted. Marcus stumbled out onto the porch. He looked nothing like the polished executive in the tuxedo from 3 days ago. He was unshaven, his eyes were rimmed with red exhaustion, and he was wearing stained sweatpants. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 72 hours because he was too busy watching his world implode. He was clutching a framed jersey, trying to wrestle it away from a deputy. "You can't take this," Marcus screamed, his voice cracking. "This is personal property?" "It's on the list, sir," the deputy said, bored, ripping it from Marcus's weak grip. "Everything purchased within the last 18 months is seized as assets against the embezzled funds." Marcus watched the jersey get tossed into a crate. Then he looked up and saw me. I didn't move. I didn't wave. I just stood there, leaning against the side of my black SUV, watching him. He froze. For a second, I saw a flash of the old arrogance, the instinct to yell at me, to demand I fix this. But it died instantly, choked out by the crushing weight of his new reality. He didn't run toward me with anger, he ran toward me with desperation. He sprinted across the wet grass, his sneakers slipping in the mud. He stopped 5 feet away from me, halted by the imposing figure of Cale, who stepped in his path with arms crossed. "Verity," Marcus gasped, breathless. "Verity, you have to stop this." "Please," I looked him up and down, letting my gaze linger on his trembling hands. "I can't stop the law, Marcus. You signed the deeds, you forged the documents. This is just cause and effect." "They're taking everything," he sobbed, tears mixing with the grime on his face. "They locked the accounts, they took the car keys, we have nothing." "You have your freedom," I said coldly. "For now, until the district attorney finishes reviewing the file I sent him." Chloe appeared in the doorway then. She looked terrified. She wasn't wearing designer heels today. She was barefoot, wrapped in a blanket, looking like a ghost haunting a house that had already exorcised her. She waddled down the steps, clutching her stomach. Marcus seized on her appearance like a drowning man grabbing a piece of driftwood. He pointed at her, his eyes wild. "Look at her, Verity. She's pregnant. You know she's pregnant." My heart didn't stutter. It didn't ache. Once the thought of Marcus having a child would have been the knife that ended me. But looking at them now, him pathetic, her broken, I realized that child was just another casualty of his selfishness. "She's having my baby," Marcus pleaded, his voice dropping to a begging whine. "You can't throw a pregnant woman onto the street. You're not that cruel. I know you, Verity. You're a good person." I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that startled even me. "You don't know me, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping an octave, hard as granite. "You knew the quiet, accommodating wife who trusted you. You killed her. The woman standing in front of you is a mogul who protects her investments." I reached for the door handle of my SUV. "We have nowhere to go," he screamed, lunging forward only to be shoved back effortlessly by Kale. "Verity, we have no money. Where are we supposed to sleep tonight?" I opened the car door and slid onto the plush leather seat. The interior smelled of expensive cedar and peace. I looked back at him one last time. "I hear your mother has a very comfortable couch in her basement," I said. "I suggest you start walking. It's a long way to the other side of town." "Verity," he howled, grabbing the top of the car door before I could close it. I looked him dead in the eye. "Get your hand off my car, Marcus, or I'll have Kale break it." He snatched his hand back as if burned. I slammed the door shut. The heavy thud sealed out his voice, turning his screams into a silent, muted pantomime of despair. I pressed the button on the armrest. The tinted window rolled up smoothly, erasing his face inch by inch. First his chin, then his screaming mouth, and finally his terrified, weeping eyes. "Drive," I commanded. The engine purred to life, a deep, powerful growl. As we pulled away from the curb, I looked into the rearview mirror. I saw two small figures standing amidst a pile of wet cardboard boxes and rejected furniture. They looked small. They looked insignificant. I watched them until we turned the corner and they vanished from sight completely. I sat back, letting my head rest against the seat. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs. I expected to feel guilt. I expected to feel sad. Instead, I felt lighter than air. I realized then that the best part of being a mogul isn't the money, the private jets, or the buildings with your name on them. It's the power to ensure that when someone tries to bury you, you have the resources to buy the shovel and bury them instead. I picked up my phone and dialed my assistant. "It's done," I said. "Put the house on the market tomorrow. Enlist it for 20% above market value. It has a story now."